The German Shepherd who broke every rule to save a child. The Austin night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think nothing could possibly go wrong. But beneath that stillness, danger was building. Inside an old apartment, where a 7-year-old girl pressed herself into the shadows of her closet, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Her stepfather's footsteps echoed closer, heavier, angrier than before. 3 blocks away, a patrol car rolled slowly down Riverside Terrace. Inside, Officer Evan Blake sipped his coffee, thinking it would be just another uneventful shift. But in the back seat, his German Shepherd partner, Rook, suddenly stiffened. The dog's ears snapped forward, claws raking the partition, body trembling with an intensity Evan had never seen. What happened next would break every rule in the handbook. Rook would leap into danger, ignoring orders and waiting for no backup, because somewhere behind those yellow curtains, a child's life was seconds away from being destroyed. The night in Austin carried a kind of hush that only seasoned officers noticed. To most, it was simply quiet. A Tuesday evening, settling into itself, traffic lights blinking in their endless cycles, street lamps humming above sidewalks gone empty. But to Officer Evan Blake, quiet always meant something was waiting, crouched in the shadows where even the moonlight hesitated. He had walked this beat for over a decade, and if there was one thing he trusted more than the weight of the pistol on his hip, it was the instincts of the dog shifting behind him in the patrol car. Rook, a German Shepherd, with a black saddle of fur and amber eyes that caught every flicker of movement, paced the back seat restlessly. His head brushed the metal screen partition, claws clicking against the floor with every turn. He was a dog built for strength, 85 pounds of controlled muscle, but his scars told a different story. A past most people would never guess when they saw the way he now carried himself with quiet authority. Evan glanced at him in the rearview mirror and felt that familiar pang of both pride and sorrow. Rook had once been nothing but skin and bone, a survivor of a dogfighting ring busted in the outskirts of Dallas. The memory still haunted Evan. Cages lined with rust, the air heavy with blood and fear, animals too broken to meet a human's gaze. Rook had been different. Even as he limped from his crate, left ear torn and ribs showing through his coat, there had been a fire in those eyes, a question, a challenge, a refusal to bow. Evan had chosen him when every vet suggested putting him down, and the gamble had turned into the greatest partnership of his career. Now, years later, Rook sat where he belonged, in uniform, badge clipped to his harness, every scar a testament not to defeat, but to survival. Evan tapped the steering wheel with one hand, slowing the cruiser as they rolled down a stretch of Riverside Drive. The city's neon glow washed across the hood of the car. He thought of Caleb, his 12-year-old son, probably asleep by now at his sister Marissa's house. A boy who still left a light on at night, though he tried to act older, tougher. Evan had lost his wife, Caleb's mother, to a sudden stroke 3 years ago, a death that cleaved their lives in two. Since then, Marissa had stepped in, helping with dinners, homework, the little things a father on the night shift couldn't always manage. Evan hated leaving his boy behind, but duty had its own demands, and in some strange way, Caleb had come to see Rook as a second guardian. The shepherd waited by the window every morning when Caleb left for school, and Evan often caught his son reading out loud to the dog in the evenings. Comic books, history assignments, whatever kept the silence at bay. It wasn't just Evan and Caleb who had healed. Rook, too, seemed to find a new purpose in protecting the boy. Maybe it was because they both carried scars invisible to the world, the kind only time and trust could soften. The radio crackled with dispatch chatter, pulling Evan from his thoughts. A minor accident off I-35. A welfare check that turned out to be nothing more than loud music. Routine. His shift tonight had been quiet. Unusually so. The kind of quiet that could lull a man into letting down his guard, if he hadn't learned the hard way never to trust it. The streets whispered with small sounds. A soda can rattling along the curb, a stray cat darting between dumpsters, the sigh of wind through bare branches. Evan adjusted his grip on the wheel, eyes flicking to the windows of Riverside Terrace as they came into view. The apartment complex loomed like an aging sentinel, its bricks weathered and its balconies sagging with years of neglect. Faded curtains drooped in the windows, some glowing faintly with televisions, others blank, as if no one lived there at all. That was when it happened. Rook froze. His pacing stopped mid-step, and his ears snapped forward so sharply they quivered. A growl began low in his chest, so soft it almost blended with the hum of the cruiser's engine. Then he pressed himself against the partition, nose straining toward the third floor of the building. Evan slowed instinctively, eyes narrowing as he followed the line of the dog's gaze. Nothing seemed unusual. Just another row of darkened windows, one curtain stirring slightly in the night breeze. No shouting, no music, no signs of disturbance. But Rook's body told a different story. The shepherd's frame was taut, every muscle coiled like a wire, claws raking against the floor with an urgency Evan had never seen without cause. "Easy, boy," he muttered, though his own pulse quickened. The radio was still alive with routine chatter. Dispatch asking if Unit 12 could swing by for backup on a stalled vehicle. Nothing urgent. Nothing that justified what Evan was seeing now. The city outside looked peaceful. Couples walking arm in arm along Riverside. A cyclist gliding by with headphones in. A night clerk smoking by the entrance of a corner store. But Evan knew too well that appearances lied. Peaceful was what the street had looked like before the stabbing on 7th. Peaceful was what the house had seemed before he kicked in the door and found the overdose victim slumped over a crib. And peaceful was what Riverside Terrace looked like tonight, until you measured it against the rigid, trembling body of the dog who had never once sounded an alarm without reason. Evan tapped the brakes, pulling to the curb across from the building. He let the cruiser idle, eyes scanning the facade. Rook let out a sharp whine that broke off as quickly as it began. His tail was stiff, not wagging, and his breath fogged the window he pressed against. Something was wrong. Evan leaned back, unsettled. He had two choices. Log it as nothing and keep moving, or trust his partner's instincts and investigate. His hand hovered over the radio. Protocol said you didn't move without cause. Instinct whispered that cause didn't always come in plain sight. He exhaled slowly, eyes still locked on that third-floor window. And in that moment, a tremor ran through him, the same kind of tremor he saw shudder through Rook's scarred body. The stillness of the Austin night wasn't peace at all. It was the pause before a match was struck, before flames leapt, before lives changed. Whatever waited inside Riverside Terrace, it had already reached out through the dark to call them closer. Evan put the cruiser in park. Rook didn't stop staring. The cruiser's engine ticked softly in the cold night air, but inside the cab it felt like a drumbeat. Rook's body had gone rigid, pressed so tight against the mesh partition that his ribs shuddered with every restrained breath. His ears were locked, sharp triangles pointing toward the third floor of Riverside Terrace. Evan had seen his partner react before, on raids, drug busts, search and rescues. But this was different. This wasn't the precise stillness of a trained dog responding to command. This was primal. The shepherd's entire frame trembled, muscles tight, claws scratching against the partition, with an urgency that seemed to come from a place deeper than instinct. "Rook," Evan said softly, his voice filling the close cabin. The dog didn't blink, didn't even flick an ear toward his handler's voice. His amber eyes remained fixed on that one dark window, as though the night itself had narrowed down to a single square of shadow. The radio crackled, dispatch calling out another welfare check. Unit 12 confirming a false alarm at an East 6th apartment. Static followed by idle chatter about a fender bender near South Congress. Routine noise. The hum of a city in motion, none of it urgent. But in the back seat, Rook's low growl rumbled like something ancient, like the sound of an engine buried under the earth. Evan adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. He'd learned long ago not to ignore the dog. Rook had smelled narcotics hidden inside tires, explosives buried under dirt. Even a missing toddler curled in a basement laundry basket no one had thought to check. If he was reacting this violently now, there had to be a reason. And yet, Evan's eyes scanned the building. Nothing. Just a row of windows, some glowing faintly from televisions, others swallowed by dark curtains. A man stepped out onto a balcony 2 units over, lighting a cigarette. The orange flare of his lighter briefly painted his face. Tired. Ordinary. Across the street, a woman in scrubs carried groceries toward the complex. She fumbled her keys, laughed nervously to herself. Life moved on as usual. Peaceful. So why did it feel like the entire block was holding its breath? Rook's claws scraped the floor with a metallic screech. Evan twisted in his seat to look at him fully. The shepherd's fur was bristled from shoulders to haunches, his tail stiff as rebar. Every fiber of him screamed alert. His breath fogged the glass he pressed against, leaving a smear of condensation as though he were trying to push himself bodily through the barrier. "Damn it," Evan muttered under his breath. Protocol told him to keep moving. You didn't pull a vehicle over to watch shadows. You didn't storm into a building without a call or a warrant. The job had rules, and those rules existed for a reason. He could already imagine the paperwork, the reprimand from the captain if this turned out to be nothing. But his gut whispered something else. He thought about Caleb, 12 years old, sleeping at his aunt's house tonight, probably dreaming of soccer tryouts, or the comic book he'd fallen asleep reading. What if it were his boy behind that window, unseen, unheard, while the world outside moved along, indifferent? Wouldn't he want someone to trust the warning, even if it didn't fit the handbook? Evan looked back to Rook. The dog's eyes were wild but intelligent, burning with a clarity that cut through doubt. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't confused. He knew. The radio cracked again. "Unit 47, status check." Evan thumbed the mic. "Unit 47, all clear," he replied automatically, though the words sat heavy in his mouth. All clear. He almost laughed at the absurdity. The city looked clear. The streets looked safe. But danger didn't always show its face under streetlights. Sometimes it crouched in silence, hidden in the walls of places that pretended to be homes. Rook let out a sharp whine that ended in another guttural growl. It was the sound of frustration, of urgency, as if telling Evan, "You're wasting time. You know it. I know it. Move." Evan shifted the cruiser into park, his eyes still fixed on the third-floor window. He thought he saw something, a flicker, maybe just a curtain moving, or maybe not. His hand hovered over the radio again. He could call for backup, say he had a bad feeling, but dispatch wanted facts, not feelings. And right now, all he had was a dog trembling like the air carried fire. For a long moment, he sat caught between two worlds, the safe cocoon of procedure and the raw, instinctive trust in the partner who had never once failed him. The city around him breathed its shallow, ordinary breaths. The neon buzzed.
The cigarette smoker exhaled his grey plume into the night. The woman with groceries disappeared into a stairwell, and through it all, Rook's growl deepened, reverberating in Evan's bones. Evan exhaled slowly, his decision settling over him like armor. He turned off the headlights. The cruiser sank deeper into shadow. "All right, boy," he whispered, his voice low, steady. "We'll see what you see." Rook didn't move his gaze from the window, but the growl eased into a steady, impatient pant, as if he understood that his handler had finally chosen. Evan leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowed on Riverside Terrace. The stillness of Austin pressed against him from all sides, and in that fragile silence, he knew the peace of the night was an illusion, one a dog had just torn apart with the sound of his breath. The old walls of Riverside Terrace were thin enough to hear almost everything: the scrape of a chair, the muffled voices of neighbors, the hum of televisions left on to fill the silence. But inside Unit 3C, the sounds narrowed to one thing: footsteps. 7-year-old Lila Hart pressed herself into the corner of her small bedroom closet, her stuffed rabbit Pepper clutched tight against her chest. She buried her face into its worn fur, whispering numbers into the darkness, the way other children whispered prayers. 1, 2, 3. She counted them the way she always did. It was her survival tactic. Her stepfather's footsteps from the front door to the kitchen always measured 12. 12 steps meant he was walking straight, steady enough. 12 steps meant he'd probably just collapse into his chair, open a beer, and let the night slip into television static. But tonight, her whisper caught in her throat. There had only been 9. 9 heavy, uneven thuds across the warped floorboards. Then a pause, like the world itself had skipped a beat. Pepper's one-button eye seemed to watch her, as if it understood. Lila clutched the rabbit tighter. 9, Pepper. Just 9. Her voice trembled, barely audible, a secret shared only with a toy who had soaked up more tears than pillows ever had. From the kitchen came the low clatter of glass. The refrigerator door opened and slammed shut. She could picture it without seeing, her mother standing stiff at the counter, her shoulders tense, moving quickly, quietly, trying not to draw notice. Nora Hart had become an expert at silence. At 34, she wore her exhaustion like a second skin. Once she had been lively, a nurse who laughed easily with patients and hummed while folding laundry. Now she moved as though each motion carried weight, her smile more memory than habit. Tonight, she stirred a pot of soup with the precision of a surgeon. Though her mind wasn't in the food, it was in the rhythm of those footsteps. 9, only 9. Behind her, a chair scraped harshly across the linoleum floor. "Where's the beer?" The voice was slurred, thick with the anger that always came before the shouting. Nora set the wooden spoon down carefully, hands trembling only slightly. I put some in the fridge this morning, Owen." The man who slouched into the doorway was nothing like the one she had first met. Owen Pike had once stood tall in a firefighter's uniform, broad shoulders filling a room, his laughter easy, his presence commanding. She had fallen for the idea of him back then, the hero, the rescuer, the man who would keep her and Lila safe after her husband's sudden death had left her adrift. But that version of Owen was gone. What remained was a husk. Bloodshot eyes, stubble that had grown past rugged into neglect, and the smell of whiskey clinging to him like a second uniform. His t-shirt was stained, his hair disheveled, his once proud posture bent under the weight of bitterness. Everyone in town knew about his disgrace. The scandal had hit the papers 2 years ago. Allegations of bribery, cutting corners on safety inspections, whispers of cash exchanging hands in parking lots. Owen had denied it all at first, shouting about conspiracies and jealous rivals. But when the department cut him loose, the truth settled like ash in his chest. From that day, the fire inside him burned differently. Now, instead of saving people from flames, he carried them into his home in the form of rage, using his fists and his words to scorch whatever was near. Nora turned back to the stove, careful to keep her voice calm. "It's right there, second shelf." Owen yanked the fridge open, bottles clinking as he grabbed one. The hiss of the cap twisting off filled the kitchen. He took a long swallow, his Adam's apple bobbing, then slammed the bottle down on the table. "Warm," he muttered, as if the beer itself had insulted him. His eyes flicked toward Nora, sharp and accusing. "Can't even keep a fridge cold, huh?" She kept her gaze down. "The fridge is fine, Owen. Maybe it was from the last batch." His laugh was humorless, jagged. Always an excuse. Lila listened from the closet, knees drawn up to her chest. Pepper squeezed so hard the seams strained. She could picture her mother's face. Lips pressed thin, eyes darting but never meeting his. She hated those moments most. The way her mom seemed to shrink, as though if she just made herself small enough, quiet enough, maybe Owen wouldn't notice her at all. But Owen always noticed. The scrape of his chair sounded again as he sat. The thud of his boots against the table leg echoed like a hammer. Lila began to rock slightly, counting again in whispers. Not the footsteps this time, but her own breaths. 1, 2, 3. Anything to make the silence less terrifying. Nora ladled soup into bowls, placing one in front of Owen. He didn't thank her. He just stared at the steaming broth, then shoved it aside with the back of his hand. The bowl slid, splashing liquid across the table. "Smells like nothing," he growled. "You ever think maybe that's why he left? Because you can't even cook a meal worth eating?" The word struck sharper than any hand. Nora stiffened, her face pale, but she didn't answer. She had learned not to. Upstairs, the neighbor's television laughed canned laughter. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Life in Riverside Terrace carried on, oblivious, while inside Unit 3C, dread thickened with the smoke of Owen's cigarette. Lila buried her face against Pepper, whispering to the rabbit as tears slipped down her cheeks. 9 steps, Pepper. Just 9. That's bad. And though she couldn't explain why, she knew tonight was going to be worse than usual. Once, Owen Pike's name had meant something. There had been a time when the firehouse bells rang and men scrambled into gear, and Owen was the first to his feet. His boots were always by the bunk door, laces coiled like waiting snakes, helmet polished though soot scarred its edges. He was the kind of firefighter who drew admiration simply by moving, broad-shouldered, steady, the man you wanted behind you when the roof started to groan and the smoke grew thick enough to steal the air from your lungs. In those days, his smile came easily, the kind that made rookies believe they could survive the inferno. He'd slap their shoulders before they climbed ladders, bark encouragement into the radios. And when he emerged from collapsing buildings with a soot-streaked child in his arms, neighbors clapped, reporters jotted notes, and his name carried weight in the city's heartbeat. Nora remembered seeing him once, long before she knew him. The news had run a clip. Owen stumbling from a burning duplex, flames still licking the roof behind him. His arms cradled a toddler wrapped in a blanket. The crowd had cheered, and his smile, exhausted but radiant, burned into her memory. Back then, she thought, that is what a hero looks like. But heroes have cracks, and Owen's ran deep. The scandal came quiet at first. Whispers in the locker rooms, rumors about overlooked inspections, permits signed too quickly. Some said Owen had taken envelopes under the table. Others claimed he'd turned a blind eye for a friend who owned rental properties. At first, no one believed it. Owen Pike, the golden boy of Engine 12, the man who'd pulled half a dozen children from smoke-choked bedrooms. No. It couldn't be true, but truth has a way of clawing through lies, same as fire chews through walls. The investigation hit the papers. Bribery allegations rock fire department. Headlines painted him in strokes of betrayal. Suddenly, those same neighbors who once clapped at his rescues muttered when he passed on the street. Men he'd trained beside stopped meeting his eyes. The department turned cold, the brothers he'd bled with retreating into silence. When the official dismissal came, it was like watching a man stripped bare in front of the world. They pulled the badge from his chest, took the helmet he'd carried into battle with flame, handed him a letter that reduced his years of service to ash. Owen walked out of the firehouse that day with nothing but bitterness smoldering in his chest. The city forgot him quickly, but bitterness has long memory. Nora had met him a year later. By then, she was already drowning. Her husband, David Hart, had died suddenly, an aneurysm at work that tore through their lives in one cruel afternoon. One minute he was sending her a text about picking up milk, and the next she was staring at doctors who said words like rupture and time of death. She had been 31, with a daughter too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, and a grief too heavy for her own bones to carry. She remembered lying awake at night, listening to Lila whimper in her sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit for comfort and thinking, "We need someone. We need protection." When Owen appeared, he seemed like an answer to that whispered prayer. He was still strong then, still broad and confident, still wearing the remnants of his firefighter pride like armor. His voice had that steady timbre, his smile still carried traces of the man the news had once celebrated. Nora hadn't cared about the whispers of scandal. She only saw a man who had run into burning buildings for strangers, who spoke to Lila with a softness that made the little girl blink in surprise. And more than anything, she saw someone who could fill the void David had left. Her family had warned her. "Nora, you're rushing. You don't know him." But grief makes desperate choices. She didn't want to be alone anymore. She didn't want her daughter growing up without a father figure. So she clung to Owen Pike like a woman grabbing at driftwood in a storm, ignoring the splinters that dug deeper the longer she held on. At first he tried. She'd catch glimpses of the firefighter he used to be, the way he'd fix a broken chair leg with careful hands, or show Lila how to tie a proper knot with twine. He'd cook breakfast some mornings, whistling off key, and for a brief moment, Nora could believe in second chances. But the bitterness never left. It lived in him like an ember, glowing hotter each time he glanced at the newspaper, or ran into an old colleague who crossed the street instead of saying hello. He started drinking more. His laughter became edged with sharpness, his silences heavier, and when the bottles piled up in the trash and the bills went unpaid, the ember flared into rage. Nora saw it first in small things. The slam of a door that rattled the walls, the way his jaw tightened when Lila spilled juice on the table. Then came the sharper words, the accusations, the muttered resentments. He called himself a man wronged by the world. She told herself he was just in pain, that time would heal. But time didn't heal Owen Pike. It curdled him. Now, when Nora looked at him across the table, beer in his hand, eyes bloodshot with fury, she could still remember the man from the news clip, the firefighter carrying a child through smoke. But that image was only a ghost, and she was trapped with what the ghost had left behind. And deep down, she knew. She hadn't just clung to a replacement protector. She had invited the fire into her own home. The crayons lay scattered across the table like fallen soldiers, their bright wrappers dulled from overuse. In the middle of the page, Lila Hart pressed the black crayon so hard that its wax fractured into shards. She didn't notice. Her small hand moved with feverish intensity, carving shadows across the white sheet. Other children in her second-grade classroom sketched houses with slanted rooftops, stick-figure families smiling under suns that wore sunglasses. Lila's paper looked nothing like theirs. She drew flames. Thick, jagged tongues of orange and red, curling out from windows. Over the fire, she drew a ladder, but not the straight, sturdy kind they saw in safety drills. Hers bent awkwardly in the middle, its rungs splintered, broken halfway to the top. And then she drew people. Not smiling stick figures, but faceless silhouettes, arms stretched out toward the sky, fingers clawing. By the time the recess bell rang, the page was heavy with wax, edges smudged gray from where her trembling fingers rubbed across the paper. Mrs. Dalton, her teacher, paused at the desk. She was a kind woman in her 50s, the sort who tucked tissues into her sleeve and always had peppermints in her pocket. Her eyes softened as she looked at Lila's drawing. "That's very intense, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Can you tell me what it is?" Lila hunched her shoulders, her blonde hair falling like a curtain to shield her face. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, Pepper, tucked into her backpack, but pulled out when no one was looking, closer to her side. "Just a picture," she murmured. Mrs. Dalton crouched, lowering her voice. "Why don't you draw something happy next time, like a park or your favorite toy?" But Lila's gray eyes flicked upward, empty in a way no child should be. "I don't know how." The words clung to Mrs. Dalton long after the bell. That afternoon, she requested a quiet word with Nora Hart when Nora came to collect her daughter. Nora still wore her hospital scrubs from a long shift in the ER, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She listened as Mrs. Dalton laid the drawings on the desk, 3 in total, one with fire, one with a broken ladder, and one with a man drawn in crude black lines, his face blank, hands too large. "She draws like this often?" Nora asked, her voice tight. "Yes," Mrs. Dalton said gently. "And she's very quiet. She flinches when other children get loud. I've also noticed some bruises on her arms. Small, but—" Nora's cheeks flushed. She gathered the papers quickly, folding them into her purse as though hiding them from view would erase them. "She's clumsy," she said, "always bumping into things. And, well, she's been through a lot since her father passed." Mrs. Dalton wanted to press further, but she recognized the wall in Nora's eyes. The one made of fear and shame, built carefully so nothing could leak out. "Of course," she said softly, though her gut twisted. "I just want to be sure she's okay." "She's fine," Nora replied too quickly, reaching for Lila's hand. "She's fine." Lila kept her eyes down, fingers curled around Pepper's ear, her silence louder than any denial her mother could offer. At home, the signs were everywhere, if anyone looked closely enough. The bruise along her forearm, hidden beneath long sleeves even in the Texas heat. The way she avoided mirrors, as though catching her own reflection might betray her secrets. The instinctive flinch when a door slammed too hard, when footsteps thundered down the hall. She had learned the art of silence, of shrinking into corners, of making herself so small she might vanish. In her bedroom, the walls were lined with sketches shoved into drawers. Some showed monsters with empty faces, looming over small children. Others were fire, always fire, curling through doorways, devouring everything. She didn't draw heroes, no firefighters, no policemen, no happy endings, just flames and broken ladders. At night, she whispered to Pepper as the sound of bottles clinking reached her from the kitchen. "It's okay," she told the rabbit. "If we stay very quiet, he won't notice us.
If we don't breathe too loud, maybe he'll forget we're here. Pepper never answered, but she imagined he understood. The next week, Lila's teacher made another call, this time to the school counselor. But when Nora was summoned to the office, she sat stiff in the chair, listening to words like possible trauma and support services, her hands twisting in her lap. "She's grieving," Nora repeated, her voice flat, her eyes down. "Her father died. Children grieve in strange ways. And the bruises? She falls. She's clumsy." The counselor hesitated, then nodded, jotting notes. Another report filed away. Another alarm muted by explanations, and so the days bled into each other. Lila continued to draw her flames. The teachers whispered in the break room, their concern wrapped in bureaucratic helplessness. Nora went home each night and cooked in silence, praying Owen's mood wouldn't shift from brooding to violent. And Lila clung to her stuffed rabbit, retreating further into her private world of drawings where fire was always near, ladders always broke, and faces were left blank because it was easier than drawing the monsters she already knew. One afternoon, as the sky bruised with sunset, Lila sat cross-legged on her bed, sketching again. She drew a house, her house, but this time she added a figure standing outside, a dog. Its ears sharp, its body strong, its eyes bright amber. She didn't know why she drew it. Maybe she had seen the police canines at a school safety demo once. Maybe it was something deeper, some instinct, some hope. For the first time, the figure inside her flames didn't look alone. The patrol car rolled down East Riverside, the hum of the tires carrying through the steel frame like a steady pulse. To most officers, this part of the shift was the lull, the hours between bar fights and dawn calls, when the city exhaled into uneasy quiet. But Evan Blake had learned not to trust lulls. Silence had teeth, and too often it bit hardest when you let your guard down. In the back seat, Rook was anything but calm. The German shepherd's nails tapped restlessly against the rubber flooring. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, panting though the air wasn't hot. Every few seconds, he turned his head toward the window, ears pricked sharp, then swung back to stare at the mesh partition, as if urging Evan to look harder, drive slower, notice. Evan glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You're worked up tonight, boy," he murmured. His voice was steady, but his gut tightened. Rook wasn't the kind of dog who fussed without reason. He thought of where the agitation had begun, outside Riverside Terrace. That third-floor window. Nothing but darkness behind faded curtains. Rook had locked onto it like a hunter scenting prey. And even now, blocks away, the dog carried the tension with him, unable to settle, as though the scent had burned itself into his lungs. Evan turned down a quieter street, scanning the sidewalks. A homeless man pushed a cart filled with cans. A couple of college kids stumbled out of a taco truck, laughing too loud for the hour. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that should have Rook pacing like a caged storm. But maybe, Evan thought grimly, that was the point. Nothing looked wrong. And wasn't that always how it was? On the surface, the world pretending everything was fine, while behind closed doors, darkness pressed in. He thought of Rook's past. The raid had been years ago, but Evan still remembered the smell first. The rancid stench of blood and ammonia, the metallic tang of fear that clung to his uniform long after he left. Cages stacked like rusted coffins, dogs pressed against the bars, their eyes dulled by suffering. And then there was Rook. The shepherd had been a wreck, ear torn, ribs sharp under patchy fur, teeth cracked from biting steel. But it wasn't his wounds that stopped Evan in his tracks. It was the defiance. Rook had locked eyes with him through the bars and growled, low and raw, not out of hatred but survival. It was the sound of something that refused to die, even when the world gave it every reason to. Evan had seen that same look in children's eyes. Kids pulled out of meth houses, kids left too long with drunk parents, kids who shrank at every sudden movement. Their bodies might be small, their voices quiet, but in their eyes you saw it. The desperate, trembling question, will anyone see me? Will anyone stop this? That's what haunted him as he watched Rook now, pacing, restless, unsettled. Feels the same, doesn't it? Evan said softly, almost to himself. Cages come in different shapes. Yours was steel. Theirs are walls and secrets. Rook's ears flicked at his voice, but the dog kept moving, claws scraping lightly with each turn. Evan pulled the cruiser into a vacant lot, letting the engine idle. He leaned forward, typing into the onboard computer. If his partner couldn't let go of Riverside Terrace, then maybe he shouldn't either. The building's address appeared on the screen. He scrolled through recent dispatch logs. His jaw tightened. 6 calls in the past 3 months, all listed as welfare checks. All marked the same way. Caller hung up, unable to confirm disturbance. Negative findings. 6 times someone inside had dialed 911, and 6 times silence had swallowed the line. Evan leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. He knew how it worked. Dispatchers marked the calls, units knocked on the door, and if no one answered, the report closed. No evidence, no entry, end of story. Except it wasn't the end, was it? Behind those unanswered doors could be anything. A child holding a phone with shaking hands, a mother silenced by a glance, an abuser standing too close for words to make it past her lips. Evan rubbed a hand across his jaw. He'd seen it too often. Families trapped in houses that looked ordinary from the street, but rotted from the inside. The law demanded proof. Pain didn't always provide it. Rook whined sharply, pressing his nose against the mesh. His amber eyes caught the glow of the dashboard lights, bright and insistent. "I hear you," Evan said, his voice low. "I hear you." He pulled back onto the street, the glow of Riverside Terrace still lingering in his thoughts like smoke after a fire. The city around him moved in lazy patterns, sirens distant, neon buzzing, the hum of life, pretending everything was fine. But in the back seat, his partner told a different story, and Evan knew better than to ignore it. The soup had gone cold long before anyone touched it. It sat in chipped bowls on the kitchen table, thin steam curling upward and fading into the stale air of the apartment. Outside, the muffled hum of Riverside Terrace life carried on. Televisions glowing behind walls, laughter of teenagers echoing from the stairwell. But inside Unit 3C, the world narrowed to 3 people and the sharp edge of a man's temper. Owen Pike leaned forward in his chair, shoulders hunched, a bottle of whiskey parked dangerously close to his elbow. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites threaded with crimson veins, and his words came slurred yet forceful, weighted with the bitterness of a man who had once commanded respect and now had none. "You know what's wrong with this world?" he rasped, his hand gripping the table's edge. "Nobody respects anyone anymore. Kids talk back. Wives forget their place. Obedience. That's what keeps things from falling apart. That's what keeps families strong." He reached behind him, fumbling, and set something heavy down in the center of the table. His old firefighter helmet. The once proud symbol was battered, the paint chipped, the number plate cracked. Owen ran his hand over it, as if it were a sacred relic. Then,
With sudden violence, he slammed it down, the hollow clang rattling the bowls and sending a shiver through the room. "See this?" he barked, his voice rising. "This meant something. When I wore this, men listened. People stood aside. Kids shut their mouths and did as they were told." Across from him, Nora Hart flinched, spoon halfway to her lips. She forced a smile, soft and appeasing, her nurse's instincts shifting into overdrive. Always de-escalate, always soothe. "Owen, please," she said gently. "It's late. Let's just eat. You've had a long day." But her voice carried tremors she couldn't hide. At the far end of the table, Lila sat frozen, Pepper the rabbit clutched in her lap beneath the tablecloth. Her small fingers twisted its ears into knots as her grey eyes darted between her mother and stepfather. Her lips pressed together tightly, holding back the questions and fears that rose in her throat. Owen's gaze snapped to her. "You," he said, pointing a thick finger in her direction. "Do you know what respect means, Lila? Do you?" She shook her head quickly, eyes wide, shoulders drawing in as if she could make herself smaller. "It means doing what you're told," Owen growled. "It means not sneaking around with phones, not whispering to outsiders, not making me look like a damn fool." He slammed his palm against the helmet again, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Lila's whole body jolted. Pepper slipped from her lap and hit the floor, but she didn't dare bend to pick him up. Nora reached for Owen's hand, her voice trembling but steady enough to disguise panic. "She's just a child, Owen. She's learning. Respect takes time." "Time?" His laugh was harsh, hollow. "I gave this city 15 years of my time. 15 years running into fire while everyone else ran out. And how did they repay me?" He spat the words like poison. "They took everything. Stripped me of my badge, my brothers, my pride. Now I come home, and what do I get? Disobedience. Silence. A house full of people who look at me like I'm nothing." His hand shot out, gripping the helmet as if he might hurl it across the room. For a moment his knuckles whitened, veins bulging as rage trembled through him. Nora reached quickly, laying her hand over his, her voice urgent. "You're not nothing, Owen. You're still here. You still have us." The words were meant to calm him, but they tasted like ash in her mouth. Deep down, she wondered if they were even true anymore. Lila's eyes brimmed with tears, her face pale. She wanted to run, to hide in the closet, where counting footsteps felt safer than this. But she didn't move. Not when Owen's glare flicked back to her, burning through the silence. "You think I don't see it?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous now. "The way you look at me, like I'm some kind of monster." Lila blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "No, sir. No." The words trembled, cracked like thin glass. Owen leaned back finally, the storm in his chest pausing for breath. He took another swallow from the bottle, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and muttered, "Respect. That's all I ask." But the room knew better. Respect had nothing to do with it. Fear was what he craved. Fear was what he fed on. Nora reached under the table, her hand finding Lila's trembling fingers. She squeezed gently, her eyes never leaving Owen. It was the only promise she could offer her daughter in that moment. "I see you. I'm here. Hold on." The soup cooled further. The helmet sat in the center of the table, a relic of a man who no longer existed, gleaming faintly under the flickering light bulb. And in the silence that followed, only the sound of Lila's ragged breathing filled the space. The apartment was quiet after dinner.
the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from fear, holding its breath. The bowls of cold soup still sat on the table, forgotten, as if no one dared move them. Owen had slumped onto the couch, a bottle balanced on his knee, muttering to himself between gulps. Nora cleaned in near silence, her movements careful, measured. She wiped the table slowly, as though scrubbing harder might set off another storm. From the corner of her eye, she watched her daughter slip down the hallway toward her bedroom, Pepper dangling loosely in her arms. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she closed her door, careful not to let the latch click too loudly. She moved quickly, knowing she had only moments before Owen's attention shifted. From beneath her pillow, she pulled out the small cell phone her grandmother had given her on her last visit, a battered flip phone, prepaid, hidden like a secret lifeline. Grandma Mabel had pressed it into her hand in the parking lot months ago, her voice low and urgent. "If you're ever scared, baby, you call me, no matter the time. Promise me." And Lila had promised. Her hands trembled now as she flipped the phone open. She knew the number by heart, the digits etched into her mind like prayer beads. She whispered them as she pressed the buttons. 9, 1, 3, 4. The tiny screen glowed faintly in the dark, illuminating her pale face, her wide grey eyes. "Come on," she whispered, clutching Pepper close with her free arm. "Please, Grandma, pick up." But before the call could connect, the door burst open. Owen filled the frame, a shadow that seemed to swallow the light. His eyes were glassy, his jaw clenched, the bottle still clutched in one hand. He had heard the faint chirp of the phone. "What the hell is that?" Lila froze, the phone slipping in her sweaty palm. She tried to shut it, hide it behind her back, but Owen was faster. He lunged forward, the bottle clattering onto the carpet as his hand shot out. The slap of his palm against hers stung, sending the phone skittering across the floor. It landed against the wall with a hollow crack, the call screen still glowing before it blinked to black. Lila gasped, clutching Pepper tighter, tears spilling down her cheeks in hot streams. Owen loomed over her, breathing hard. "You think you're clever, huh? Think you can sneak behind my back? Call outsiders to come stick their noses where they don't belong?" His voice rose with each word, rough and jagged, like steel dragged across stone. "Please," Lila whispered, her small voice breaking. "I just wanted—" "Wanted what?" he snarled, cutting her off. "To make me look weak, to run crying to your grandma so she can tell the world lies about me?" He leaned closer, his face inches from hers, the smell of whiskey burning her nose. "No one interferes in this family. No one. You hear me?" Lila nodded quickly, pressing her face into Pepper's matted fur. The rabbit soaked up her tears as her shoulders shook. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the shadows of her closet, to hide where numbers and whispered prayers might still keep her safe. Behind them, Nora's voice came from the hallway, shaky but desperate. "Owen, stop. She's just a child. Let her be." But he didn't even glance at his wife. His eyes stayed locked on Lila, hard and unrelenting. "Outsiders ruin families," he growled. "Your grandma doesn't know anything. She doesn't live here. She doesn't see what I sacrifice, what I carry. And I'll be damned if I let her poison you against me." He straightened finally, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. He snatched the broken phone from the floor, flipped it shut with a snap, and shoved it deep into his pocket. "No more calls," he said flatly. "No more secrets. If I catch you with this again, you'll regret it." With that, he turned and stormed out, muttering curses under his breath, his boots striking the floor like drumbeats of anger. Nora rushed in as soon as he was gone, kneeling beside her daughter. She gathered Lila into her arms, smoothing back her hair, whispering apologies that felt as useless as they sounded.
"I'm sorry, baby," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." But Lila didn't answer. She only clung tighter to Pepper, her tears soaking its worn fabric, her small body shaking with silent sobs. And in that silence, the truth hung heavy in the air. Their lifeline had been cut, their world sealed tighter. Whatever hope Lila had placed in that secret phone now lay in Owen's pocket, swallowed by the very man she feared most. The night in Austin had deepened into that strange hour when the city seemed half asleep, the glow of neon signs fading into silence, and the hum of traffic thinning to a low whisper. For most, it was the hour of rest. For Officer Evan Blake, it was the hour of doubt. His cruiser rolled along the boulevard, headlights sweeping over shuttered storefronts and half-lit intersections. The dashboard clock blinked 11:42 p.m., each minute dragging heavier than the last. In the rearview mirror, Rook paced, restless again. The German Shepherd's nails clicked against the rubber mat, tail stiff, head angled toward the window. Every few seconds he released a low growl, the kind that vibrated in his chest and filled the cabin like distant thunder. His amber eyes tracked something beyond the glass, something Evan couldn't see but could feel, in the way the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. They were near Riverside Terrace again. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel. He hadn't meant to circle back here, not consciously. His patrol map had dozens of other streets, dozens of safer loops. But his gut, pulled by the anchor of Rook's instincts, had steered him here as surely as a compass pointing north. The building loomed ahead, its faded brick facade catching the glow of a street lamp. By day it might have looked ordinary, but at night, its windows were dark sockets, its stairwells echo chambers, the kind of place where silence could hide screams. Rook's growl deepened. He pressed his paws against the partition, nose smearing the glass, ears locked on a specific third-floor window. The same one. Always the same one. Evan exhaled slowly, the weight of indecision heavy in his chest. "Not protocol," he muttered under his breath. "No call, no entry. You know the rules." But rules didn't explain why a dog like Rook, a dog who had clawed his way out of a dogfighting ring, who had smelled blood and fear more times than Evan could count, was trembling with such urgency. He thought of Caleb, asleep miles away at his sister's house, safe and warm. Then he thought of the little girl he'd seen in passing months ago at this very complex, hair in messy braids, clutching a stuffed rabbit as she trailed behind a tired-looking woman in scrubs. A kid about Caleb's age. What if she was the reason Rook couldn't let this place go? Evan's chest tightened. He'd seen too many after-the-fact reports, too many headlines. Police missed the signs. Child found too late. He still carried those ghosts, and he wasn't sure he could stomach another. The radio crackled, breaking the quiet. Dispatch called out a minor traffic stop across town, nothing urgent. Evan thumbed the mic but didn't press it. His eyes stayed locked on Riverside Terrace. Rook barked suddenly, short, sharp, furious. The sound echoed in the cabin like a gunshot. "Jesus, boy," Evan whispered, startled, but the shepherd didn't relent. He growled again, claws scraping the partition with frantic energy, as if his very body were begging Evan to act. Evan's throat went dry. He leaned forward, studying the window. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a curtain twitch, a shadow shifting. But it was gone too quickly to be sure. His rational mind told him it could be nothing, a draft, a television flicker. But his gut told him it was something. He lifted the radio mic, hesitating. Once he called it in, there would be questions. If backup showed and nothing was wrong, he'd be chewed out for wasting resources. A veteran cop, jumping at shadows. It wouldn't look good. And yet, he thought of Rook again, of the scars carved into the shepherd's ear, the notch in his muzzle where another dog had once torn at him in a pit while men cheered. He thought of how Rook had survived, not by ignoring danger, but by facing it head-on. Sometimes, instinct was the only thing that kept you alive. Evan pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, he said, his voice even, though his pulse thudded in his ears. "Requesting backup at Riverside Terrace Apartments. Possible domestic disturbance. 3rd floor. Nothing confirmed. Just in case." The line crackled. A pause. Then, "Copy that, Unit 47. Backup ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. An eternity if something was happening inside. Evan replaced the mic, jaw clenched. He could already hear the captain tomorrow, lecturing about procedure, about caution, but he didn't care. He trusted Rook more than he trusted silence. He shut off the headlights and parked beneath the shadow of a sycamore tree across from the building. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the night pressing in heavy and still. Beside him, Rook whined, low and anxious, tail thumping once against the floor like a question. "Are we going? Are we waiting?" Evan reached back, resting his hand against the shepherd's thick fur through the mesh. The dog's muscles quivered under his palm, energy coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. "Not yet," Evan murmured. "Hold on, partner. Just a little longer." But even as he said it, he knew 10 minutes was a long time. And the night was already shifting, carrying with it the sense of something broken inside that building, something dangerous, something that might not wait for help to arrive. Evan's eyes returned to the dark 3rd-floor window. His gut twisted. His decision was made, whether protocol liked it or not. The medal lay on the floor like a fallen truth, its ribbon twisted, the brass circle cracked down the middle. It had slipped from the shelf above the mantel, landing with a faint clink that should have meant nothing, just another forgotten trinket disturbed by time. But for Owen Pike, it was not nothing. It was everything. He stood frozen, staring at the fractured emblem of what had once defined him. The small disc bore the insignia of the Austin Fire Department, a commendation for bravery earned years ago when he had carried a child out of a burning duplex. He could still hear the mother's screams, feel the searing heat on his back, the child's tiny fingers digging into his soot-streaked jacket. That day had made him a hero. That medal had been proof. Now, it was broken. "What did you do?" His voice cut across the room, sharp as shattered glass. Lila, crouched on the rug with her stuffed rabbit Pepper, froze mid-breath. She had only been dusting the lower shelves, wanting to make things perfect, like her mother always asked before Owen got home. She hadn't even touched the medal. Maybe her elbow brushed it. Maybe gravity had done the rest. But in Owen's eyes, the truth didn't matter. "I didn't mean," she stammered, her small hands trembling as she held Pepper to her chest. "Didn't mean?" Owen's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. He staggered forward, the smell of whiskey riding his breath, his boots heavy on the carpet. This was the only thing left that mattered, and you were too careless to respect it. He snatched the medal from the floor, slicing his thumb on the jagged edge. Blood welled quickly, dripping onto the brass, staining it like rust. His eyes widened at the sight, but not from pain. It was something deeper, something darker. The room blurred for him. Suddenly, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was back in the firehouse locker room, holding the medal up for his crew to see. They'd clapped him on the back, voices full of pride. "Hell of a job, Pike. That kid's alive because of you." He'd felt 10 feet tall that day, indestructible. But memory twisted. The locker room dissolved into a courtroom, where he sat in shame as reports of bribery filled the air. A contractor, a payout, corners cut on inspections. His name dragged through headlines. Fallen hero, firefighter indicted. He heard the gavel slam, echoing in his skull. He saw the faces of his brothers in uniform, eyes full of disgust, betrayal. He felt the weight of the department stripping his badge, the whisper of coward and disgrace following him out the door. The heat rose again, not from pride this time, but from flames licking through memories he couldn't control. He saw smoke rolling down a hallway, choking him, blinding him. He saw beams collapsing, felt the sting of cinders against his skin.
He heard children crying in the distance, voices he couldn't reach. He heard Marcus, the rookie who'd looked up to him, screaming for help, except Marcus wasn't real. Marcus was just the ghost Owen had invented to explain away his own fall, the phantom brother who never existed. Now, holding the broken medal, Owen felt as if the walls were closing in, the apartment shrinking into a burning house. His pulse thundered in his ears. Nora appeared in the doorway, her scrubs wrinkled from her shift, her hair pulled back hastily. She froze when she saw the scene. Owen clutching the medal, blood dripping from his hand, Lila trembling against the couch. "Owen," she said softly, her voice urgent but calm, the way she spoke to trauma patients. "It was an accident. It can be fixed." "Fixed?" His laugh was harsh, jagged. "You don't fix something like this. Once it's broken, it stays broken, just like everything else." He turned on Lila again, eyes blazing. "Do you know what it took to earn this? Do you know what I gave up? And now you've destroyed it like it was nothing." Lila's eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching Pepper so tightly its seams strained. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry aloud. She knew better than to make noise. Owen's chest heaved as he stared at her, seeing not a child, but the reflection of all his failures. The apartment filled with smoke again in his mind, fire roaring, the weight of judgment suffocating him. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice breaking into a growl. "The medal was proof I wasn't worthless, proof I mattered. And now—" His bloodied hand tightened around the shard, the edge biting into his palm. "Now, there's nothing left." Nora stepped forward, fear tightening her chest. "Owen, please. She's just a little girl. Don't put this on her. It's not her fault." But he wasn't listening.
He was drowning in flames only he could see, choking on smoke that wasn't there. His mind had splintered, and in its jagged edges everything became a threat, especially the small, trembling girl before him. The broken medal slipped from his grip, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. His hand, still bleeding, clenched into a fist. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. The fragile line between anger and violence stretched taut, ready to snap. Lila felt it. Nora saw it. And somewhere outside, pacing in the back of a patrol car, Rook felt it too. A disturbance on the wind, the scent of fear sharp and metallic, pulling him toward the inevitable breaking point. The air in the apartment hung heavy, charged with the kind of silence that follows a storm, but promises another on its heels. The broken firefighter's medal still lay on the carpet, glinting faintly under the dim light, a wound turned into metal. Owen's chest rose and fell in jagged rhythm, his fists still clenched, his eyes wild with the ghosts of fires no one else could see. Nora stood a few feet away, her heart thundering against her ribs. Her training as a nurse told her how to recognize trauma spirals, dilated pupils, flushed skin, shallow breathing. She'd seen soldiers brought into the ER looking exactly like this, caught in flashbacks, where the present blurred with the battlefield. But those men weren't in her living room. Those men hadn't been holding her daughter accountable for something as fragile as a piece of brass. "Owen," she began carefully, her voice steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. "Look at me. Please. It was an accident. Nothing more. We can fix it." His head jerked toward her, eyes narrowing. "Fix it?" His voice came low, almost animal. "You think everything can be fixed with a smile and some glue? You think I don't know better?" Nora swallowed hard, keeping her voice soft. "We'll take it to a shop tomorrow. They'll mend it. You'll see. It'll look as good as new." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were lies. Some things didn't mend. Not medals, not trust, not men who had once been heroes, but now drowned themselves in whiskey and rage. Her mind screamed the truth she'd been burying for months. Leave. Take Lila and go. Run before this gets worse. But the thought was like a bird with clipped wings. It rose, then crashed against the bars of her reality. Leaving wasn't simple. Owen had made sure of that. She remembered the first time she'd tried to talk about leaving, months ago, after he'd shoved her so hard into the wall that her shoulder had ached for weeks. She'd whispered the idea late at night, thinking maybe she could go stay with her mother. Maybe she could find shelter. Owen had heard. His eyes had gone dark. His voice cold as stone. "If you walk out with her, Nora, I'll find you, and you know I can." "You think the police will protect you? I was one of them once, their hero. I know the cracks in the system. I'll drag you back, and if I can't, I'll make sure you regret it." She had believed him, and even if she hadn't, what money did she have? Her nursing shifts barely covered rent and groceries. Owen controlled the accounts now, the bills, the car keys. He'd isolated her so slowly, so cleverly, that she hadn't even realized how tight the noose had gotten until it was too late. So she did what she always did. She tried to calm the fire before it consumed them all. "Owen," she said again, this time moving carefully closer, her palms open in a gesture of peace. "Please, just sit. Let me clean your hand. You're bleeding." For a moment, he wavered. His gaze flicked to his palm, the blood drying in dark streaks where the metal had cut him. But then his jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and he muttered, "It doesn't matter." "None of it matters anymore." Nora's heart stuttered. That tone, flat, final, was the one that frightened her most. Behind her, she felt a small tug. Lila had edged closer, Pepper clutched tight, her eyes wide with terror. Nora glanced back, meeting her daughter's gaze, and in that instant, her heart cracked in two. She crouched slightly, putting herself between Owen and Lila, her voice dropping to a whisper only her daughter could hear. "Stay invisible tonight, baby. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Let me handle this." Lila nodded quickly, tears pooling in her eyes. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching her rabbit like a lifeline. Nora straightened, turning back to Owen. She forced a small smile, the kind she'd practiced in the mirror. The one that said, "I'm not challenging you. I'm not your enemy. Please don't break us tonight." "I'll fix everything," she said softly. "The medal, dinner, us. Just give me the chance." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but they were the only tools she had left. Owen stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving. Then he laughed, a sound without joy, without warmth. He stepped past her, snatched the whiskey bottle from the table and collapsed back onto the couch. "Fix everything," he muttered. taking a long drink. We'll see about that. Nora exhaled shakily, her shoulders trembling as the tension in the room eased by a fraction. She didn't fool herself into thinking the storm was over. No, it had only passed for now. The ember still burned, waiting for the next spark. She turned her head just enough to see Lila still pressed against the wall. Pepper clutched to her chest, her tiny face pale, but determinedly silent. Invisible, just as she'd asked. And Nora's heart broke again, because in teaching her daughter how to survive, she had also taught her how to disappear. The apartment had fallen into that brittle kind of silence where even breathing felt dangerous. Nora stood in the kitchen doorway, her hands trembling around a dish towel she didn't remember picking up. Lila stayed pressed against the wall near the hallway, still clutching Pepper, her eyes darting between her mother and Owen as if watching a storm cloud form in real time. On the couch, Owen Pike cradled the whiskey bottle like it was both lifeline and weapon. His bloodied hand left dark smears across the glass as he tipped it back, gulping until amber liquid spilled down his chin and soaked into the collar of his shirt. He stared at the broken medal on the carpet, his voice low, muttering half to himself and half to the ghosts only he could see. "They don't understand," he whispered. "The world doesn't understand. It chews people up, spits them out in pieces, and we keep pretending it's mercy when we let them live through it." His laugh was jagged, hollow. He took another swig, his words slurring but his meaning razor-sharp. "You think living is mercy?" He leaned forward, glaring at Nora now. "No, living is punishment, waking up every day with nothing, with shame, with memories that burn your lungs worse than smoke. That's the real torture." Nora swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Owen, please, you're drunk. You need rest." "Rest?" He barked out a laugh. "Rest doesn't come. Not for me, not for Marcus, not for anyone who's seen what I've seen." The name slipped out before he could catch it. Marcus, the phantom brother, the soldier he always invoked when the past swallowed him whole. Lila's eyes flickered, confusion cutting through her fear. Owen clutched the medal again, pressing its jagged edge into his palm until blood welled fresh. His face twisted, pain mixing with something darker. "Mercy," he muttered again. "Mercy is release, purging the pain, ending the fire before it burns everything down." His gaze shifted slowly toward Lila. The child stiffened, her fingers tightening around Pepper until the seams groaned. Her breath came shallow, silent. She had learned too well the art of stillness. "Stay invisible tonight," her mother had said. But even invisible, she felt his eyes on her, felt the weight of something terrible taking shape behind them. Owen's voice dropped to a near growl. "Maybe she's better off not knowing, better off never carrying this shame. I could save her from it. I could save her the way no one saved me." Nora's stomach dropped. Her throat closed with panic, but she forced herself to step forward, hands out as if approaching a cornered animal. "Owen, stop. She's just a child. She deserves to live, to grow, to heal." His eyes snapped to hers, wild and bloodshot. "Heal? You think the world heals? It doesn't heal, Nora. It scars. It rots. And the fire always comes back." He shoved the bottle aside, the sound of it clattering against the floor sharp enough to make Lila flinch. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to end the suffering before it begins." The words hung in the air like smoke, filling every corner of the room, seeping into Nora's bones. She saw it now, the twisted logic, the warped mercy he had been brewing for months. And outside, as if summoned by the vibration of danger, Rook stirred. Parked in the cruiser beneath the sycamore tree, the German shepherd snapped his head up. His ears pricked, nostrils flaring. Something sharp, metallic, acrid rode the night air. Fear. Not the kind born of startled cats or passing cars, but deep, primal fear. The kind that tasted of adrenaline and salt. Rook whined, pressing his nose against the glass. His amber eyes locked on the third-floor window. His muscles tightened, a growl rumbling low in his throat. He clawed at the partition, nails scraping metal, body trembling with urgency. From the driver's seat, Evan glanced back. "Easy, boy. What is it?" But Rook's gaze never wavered. He pawed harder, frantic now, his body vibrating with something instinctual, something Evan couldn't ignore. Back inside the apartment, Owen rose to his feet. His shadow stretched across the living room, long and jagged under the flickering light. He stared at Lila with the look of a man who believed he had found his answer. Mercy by fire. Salvation through destruction. Nora's breath caught. She knew that look. She had seen it in the ER right before someone did something irreversible. She stepped quickly in front of her daughter, her voice trembling but fierce. "If you want to hurt someone, hurt me, but you will not touch her." For a brief second, something flickered in Owen's eyes. Hesitation, confusion, maybe even grief. But then it hardened again. "Mercy," he muttered, almost like a prayer. "She doesn't have to burn the way I did." And at that very moment, Rook launched himself against the cruiser window with such force that the whole vehicle rocked. His claws screeched against the glass, his bark exploding into the night. Deep, violent, unstoppable. The sound carried up the block, echoing off brick and pavement, an alarm bell only one man could truly understand. Evan's pulse spiked. He slammed the car into park, his hand already reaching for the door handle. "Hold on, boy," he muttered, heart pounding. "I'm coming." Above, in the dimly lit apartment, Owen's rage brewed hotter, darker, like fire licking at the edges of wood not yet consumed. And Rook, 3 floors below, knew time was running out. The whiskey bottle shattered against the kitchen tile, shards scattering like sparks. Owen Pike's face twisted in a rage too sharp for words. Veins bulged at his temple, his muttering about mercy hardening into something darker, more final. He lurched down the hallway, boots thudding like a countdown. In her bedroom, 7-year-old Lila Hart scrambled into her closet, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Pepper. The space smelled of mothballs and old shoes, but it was her only refuge. She pressed her cheek to Pepper's fur and began to count the footsteps, the way she had done 100 times before. 12 from the couch to my door, she whispered. 1, 2, 3. But tonight the rhythm was wrong, too fast, too heavy. Her heart raced with each number. At 11 she was shaking. At 12 she mouthed the word like a prayer, but the boots did not stop. Nora darted into the hallway, arms spread wide. "Owen, stop! Please, she's just a little girl." He shoved her aside. She hit the wall so hard a picture frame fell and shattered. Pain shot through her arm, but she forced herself up, staggering in front of Lila's door. His eyes burned with the reflection of flames only he could see. "Move," he growled. "No," Nora whispered, trembling. "You'll have to go through me." For a flicker of a second, something human crossed his face, the man who once promised to be strong after her husband's funeral. Then it vanished. He slammed his forearm into her chest, pinning her. Air rushed from her lungs. She clawed at his arm, gasping, but his strength was merciless. In the closet, Lila heard the crash and her mother's cry. She buried her face into Pepper, counting again.
Not footsteps now, but heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Nora's voice cracked. Please, Owen. She's our daughter. Don't do this. She's not mine, he spat. She's a burden. A reminder of everything I lost. I'll free her before this world destroys her, the way it destroyed me. The words cut deeper than any blow. Nora sagged to the floor as he shoved past her. With one brutal kick, the flimsy bedroom door splintered. Another kick, and it gave way. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, whispering through tears. 4, 5, 6. Owen's shadow filled the room, jagged beneath the flickering overhead light. He moved toward the closet, hands trembling, chest heaving. Behind him, Nora crawled forward, blood trickling from her forehead. Don't take her from me, she sobbed. But he kept moving. Outside, the night at Riverside Terrace was eerily still. Officer Evan Blake sat in the cruiser, tapping the steering wheel, radio mic on his lap. Backup was 10 minutes out, dispatch had said. 10 minutes too long. In the back seat, Rook was no longer the obedient K9 partner he'd trained for 3 years. The German Shepherd was trembling with urgency, claws scraping metal, amber eyes locked on the third-floor window. Easy, boy, Evan muttered. We wait for backup. But even as he said it, he knew. Rook wasn't waiting. The dog let out a guttural howl, then hurled himself against the partition. The steel mesh rattled. Another slam, and the lock gave. Rook! Evan shouted, too late. The Shepherd surged forward, leaping across the seat. His weight slammed the door handle. The latch popped. The cruiser door flew open. Rook exploded into the night air, 85 pounds of muscle and fury. Hackles raised, growl unbroken, he bounded across the street, eyes locked on the faded brick facade. His nose caught the acrid tang of whiskey, the metallic edge of fear. He hurled himself at the security door. Rusted hinges shrieked as it splintered open. The crash echoed like gunfire through the building. Lights flickered. Windows opened. Neighbors shouted, "What was that?" "Call 911." The building itself seemed to inhale, waking to chaos. Evans sprinted after him, sidearm drawn, boots hammering the pavement. "Unit 47, he hissed into his radio, voice taut. "K9 has broken entry at Riverside Terrace. Backup ETA." "Still 10 minutes, dispatch replied calmly. 10 minutes of hell. Evan bounded into the stairwell, the smell of mildew and rust thick in the air. Beneath it lingered something sharper, the sour reek of fear. His gut clenched. He thought of Caleb safe at home, then of the girl he'd glimpsed months ago clutching her rabbit. God, don't let me be too late. Above, a woman's scream tore the night, then silence. Evan froze only a heartbeat before charging upward 2 stairs at a time. Ahead, Rook's claws scraped against wood, his growls reverberating down the hallway. The sound was a drumbeat, primal and unrelenting, guiding Evan toward the storm about to break. On the 3rd floor, doors had cracked open. Neighbors peeked out, wide-eyed, retreating quickly when they saw Evan's drawn weapon and the blur of the Shepherd streak past them. Someone whispered, "Is it a raid?" Another gasped. I knew that guy was trouble. But Evan had no time for them. His focus narrowed to the far end of the hallway, where one door rattled violently, wood splintering under blows from inside. Rook slammed his body against it once, twice, 3 times. The frame cracked. The door gave way, swinging open with a splintering shriek. The Shepherd vanished inside. Evan's chest clenched as he rushed forward, every nerve on fire. His radio crackled again, useless. Backup wasn't coming soon enough. This was it. Him, his weapon, and the scarred dog who had already decided tonight would not end with a child's blood on the floor. Evan's hand tightened on the grip of his Glock. His breathing slowed, sharpened. He was about to walk into the kind of nightmare every cop dreaded. A domestic gone critical, a child in the middle, a man with nothing left to lose. And this time, he was alone. The wood of the bedroom door groaned under Owen Pike's fury. His first kick had cracked the flimsy frame, sending a jagged line down the painted surface. His second splintered the lock, shards of cheap brass scattering across the carpet. On the third, the door gave way completely. It flew inward with a splintering shriek, crashing against the wall hard enough to rattle a picture frame from its hook. The frame fell, glass shattering into dozens of glittering fragments across the floor. Inside, the small room seemed to shrink in an instant. Posters of fairy tale castles and watercolor rainbows peeled slightly at the corners, trembling with the impact. The nightlight in the corner threw a weak, flickering glow that made the shadows stretch long and menacing. In the closet, Lila Hart pressed herself against the back wall. Pepper clutched to her chest so tight she thought she might crush him. Her breath came in quick, silent bursts, her lips moving without sound as she tried to count. But the numbers broke apart, scattered like the glass across the floor. She had never seen him like this. Not just angry, not just drunk. Something else burned in his eyes, something colder, more certain. He wasn't just raging, he was resolved. Owen's boots crunched over the broken glass as he stepped into the room. His chest rose and fell, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool night air drifting in through the cracked window. He scanned the room with a predator's certainty. "Where are you, sweetheart?" His voice carried a sickening calm, the false gentleness of a man who believed his madness was mercy. "You don't need to hide. I'm here to make it all stop hurting." Lila clamped her hand over her mouth, her tiny body trembling so violently she feared the closet door would rattle. She hugged Pepper tighter, whispering into his worn fur, as though the rabbit could somehow shield her. "Please, please, please." Owen's gaze swept to the closet. The faintest smile curved his lips. He took one step forward, then another. The boards groaned beneath his weight. His hand, streaked with dried blood from the broken metal, reached toward the closet knob. "Daddy's here," he murmured. "And I'll save you before the fire does." And then the world split open. A thunderclap of claws on wood shook the hallway. A blur of black and tan muscle barreled through the shattered remains of the bedroom door with a force that sent shards of splintered wood spinning into the air. Rook. The shepherd's entrance was a storm made flesh. Hackles raised, teeth bared, amber eyes blazing with something ancient and unyielding. His growl vibrated through the floorboards, low and primal, the kind of sound that reached bone before it reached ears. Owen spun at the noise, his arm still extended toward the closet. His eyes widened, rage crashing into recognition as the animal hurtled toward him. For a moment, just a moment, he saw not Rook, but Rex, the working dog from his haunted memories, the phantom that had dug through smoke and rubble to reach a dying man. The past and present collided, his mind fracturing even further. Rook didn't care about ghosts. He didn't care about medals or broken promises. His world had narrowed to one truth: the scent of terror, bleeding from the small girl in the closet, and the man whose presence radiated danger like smoke before fire. The shepherd landed with the force of a hammer, claws scraping across the hardwood. His body angled between Owen and the closet in one seamless movement, cutting off the man's path. The room froze in that instant,
Owen, chest heaving, fists clenched, towering over the glass-strewn floor. Lila, crouched in the closet, her grey eyes wide with both fear and the first flicker of hope she'd felt in months. And Rook, scarred, unbroken, standing broad and defiant, a living wall of muscle and loyalty between predator and prey. The growl deepened, vibrating through the air like the rumble of distant thunder before a storm breaks. The collision of worlds was complete. Rage against instinct, violence against loyalty, a broken man against a dog who had already survived hell and refused to let a child enter it. And in that suspended second, as the night outside buzzed with awakening neighbors and Evan Blake pounded up the stairwell, the scene balanced on a knife's edge. The abuser and the air in Lila's bedroom shattered with sound. Rook's growl deepened, vibrating against the plaster walls like a living engine of fury. His amber eyes locked on Owen Pike's hand, the one clutching a cheap silver lighter, sparks flaring but not catching. Owen's breath came in jagged gasps, sweat streaking his temple. His words slurred into a broken prayer. Mercy, mercy by fire. End it before it spreads. Then Rook lunged. The shepherd's body snapped forward in one perfect arc of muscle and instinct. He didn't aim for Owen's throat, but for the hand that threatened to turn the room into an inferno. His jaws closed with brutal precision, teeth meeting flesh and bone just above the wrist. The crunch was sickening. Owen roared, the lighter clattering across the floor and disappearing under the bed. Blood welled hot and fast, dripping onto the carpet's shards of glass. "Get off me," Owen bellowed, swinging wildly with his free hand. But Rook held on, claws digging into the wood for leverage, his bite controlled yet unyielding. Nora scrambled forward, her voice breaking. "Rook, stop!" But she wasn't pleading with the dog. She was pleading with fate itself. Owen's wild eyes darted to her. Twisting, he seized Nora with his free arm, dragging her against his chest, his forearm pinning her throat. Blood streamed from his other arm, still clamped in Rook's jaws. "You think this mutt can stop me?" he spat, hot breath against her ear. "I saved lives. I was a firefighter. This is mercy." Nora gasped, struggling in his grip, her bare feet slicing on broken glass. Across the room, Lila crouched in the closet, clutching her rabbit tight, her wide eyes locked on Rook. The shepherd growled deeper, tightening his hold, blood dripping steady now. Evan Blake was still seconds away, pounding up the stairwell, his boots echoing like gunshots. But seconds stretched into eternity. "Owen, stop!" Nora cried. "This isn't mercy, it's murder." Owen's chest heaved, his logic twisted into delusion. The fire always wins. But not tonight. Rook shifted lower, calculating, waiting for the opening. Owen staggered, dragging Nora back, crimson smearing across the floor. He tried to kick, but the shepherd adjusted, body balanced like a soldier. The stairwell thundered. Evan reached the apartment door just as Rook's weight slammed against it. He drove his shoulder through, the frame splintering, and the world narrowed to a single frame. Chaos. Glass glittered across the carpet, blood streaked in arcs, Nora pinned against Owen's chest, Lila trembling in the shadows. And Rook, locked in combat, amber eyes blazing. Evan's Glock came up. "Austin PD, let her go now." Owen's head snapped toward him, eyes wild, spittle flying. "She's mine. I'm saving her." "Release her. Now." Evan's voice was steady, cold. Rook's growl reverberated like thunder. His bite crushed inch by inch, immobilizing Owen. Blood stained his shirt, pooling beneath him. "She'll die without me," Owen howled. Evan's gaze flicked. Rook steady, Nora pinned, Lila inches away. Too much risk for a shot. He dropped his tone, slicing through chaos with calm command. Owen, you're bleeding out. My canine won't release until you're cuffed. End this before you kill the people you swore to protect. For a flicker, the words landed, but rage surged back. He jerked his arm, screaming as Rook's jaws tightened. Hold! Evan barked. The shepherd obeyed, crushing but controlled. Amber eyes locked, unblinking. Owen's knees buckled. His strength poured out with every drop of blood. He staggered. The fire always wins. Evan moved. Holstering his weapon, he surged forward, yanking Owen's free arm behind his back. Nora slipped free, gasping as Evan drove Owen to the floor. Rook! Release! The dog obeyed instantly, leaping back, but staying ready. Owen's wrist was a ruin of blood and bone, but he was down. Evan snapped the cuffs shut with a final click that rang louder than a gunshot. Suspect in custody, he panted into his radio. Need paramedics, 3rd floor, Riverside Terrace. Owen writhed, sobbing now. I was trying to save her. You don't understand. Shut up, Evan growled, his own voice fraying under the weight of what almost happened. Nora crawled to Lila, her knees bleeding on the glass. She wrenched open the closet and pulled her daughter close. Lila sobbed into her chest, Pepper squashed between them. Evan finally exhaled, adrenaline shaking his arms. He looked at Rook, chest heaving, jaws wet with blood, yet his gaze had softened. The dog's eyes shifted from weapon to guardian. For the first time in months, Lila let go of her rabbit just long enough to touch Rook's fur. Her small voice whispered, "You saved me." Rook lowered his head, pressing his scarred muzzle into her hand. Nora collapsed beside them, gathering her daughter with shuddering sobs. I've got you, baby. I've got you. Lila clung back, caught between her mother's arms and the shepherd's steady form. For once she felt seen, protected, loved. Evan stood in the doorway, his throat tight. He thought of Caleb, safe at home, and of the thin line between safety and terror. Tonight, Rook had drawn that line with his teeth. Outside, neighbors whispered in the hall, but Evan shut the door, cocooning the family in fragile privacy. Nora's sobs faded into silent tears. Lila's breathing steadied. Rook curled protectively around her small frame, eyes closing at last. For a moment, silence filled the broken apartment. Not just absence, but a gift. The first breath of survival. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing away the chaos of Riverside Terrace. Inside, the world shrank to antiseptic sting and the rhythmic thrum of tires. Lila sat on a gurney, dwarfed by white sheets, her stuffed rabbit Pepper clutched tight. Her grey eyes darted between her mother, strapped to another stretcher, and the German shepherd pressed against her side. Rook had leapt into the ambulance without hesitation. The paramedics tried to coax him out, but his low growl made clear it wasn't a threat, it was a vow. Evan rested a steady hand on the harness. He stays. You'll waste time fighting him. The medics relented. By the time they reached St. David's, fluorescent light spilled over polished floors. Nurses swarmed the gurneys, voices clipped and efficient, female adult, possible tracheal trauma, pediatric, lacerations, shock. Through the rush, Rook padded alongside Lila, his paws silent, his ears flicking at each stranger. At the exam desk, Dr. Patel frowned. K9s aren't permitted. But when Lila's hand shot out, clutching Rook's fur, whispering, "Don't take him," Patel exhaled. Fine. He stays. Keep him under control. Inside, Nora lay pale against a pillow,
her throat wrapped in gauze, bruises blooming dark across her collarbone. Each touch made her flinch. Severe bruising. CT scan, the nurse murmured. On the next bed, Lila sat stiff while antiseptic stung her shallow cuts. She didn't cry, not until a nurse tried to move Pepper. Then panic flared. No, they stay. She clutched both the rabbit and Rook's fur. Evan intervened. Let her keep them. She's lost enough tonight. So the exam continued with Pepper on her chest and Rook's muzzle resting on the bed. Each time she flinched, her hand sank into his fur. Dr. Patel finished notes. No major injuries, shock response. She'll need monitoring and trauma counseling. The clinical words weighed heavy, but Lila understood one thing. They were talking about her. She hugged Rook tighter. Evan stood at the foot of the bed, exhaustion etching lines into his face. He knew the truth no report could capture. Without Rook, the child wouldn't be here. As if sensing, Rook pressed his scarred muzzle to Lila's lap. She bent close, whispering words too soft for anyone else. But her shoulders eased. The doors opened near midnight. Detective Elena Morales entered. 25 years of child protection work etched into her gaze. She paused at the shepherd, acknowledging the warning in his eyes with a nod. Nora sat propped on pillows, hospital gown loose at her shoulders, gauze stark against bruises at her throat. Lila curled beside Rook, Pepper clutched tight, her small frame pressed to the dog's side. Morales pulled a chair close. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Detective Morales. I need your statement. Nora's gaze flicked to Evan. He nodded. You can trust her. Her voice rasped. Where do I even start? Start with the truth, Morales said gently, and it spilled, jagged fragments of months of fear. Owen's rages, slammed doors, whispered warnings to Lila to stay invisible, the debts she hadn't known until too late, the night she thought of leaving, and the threats that followed. Her voice broke on the admission. I thought if I was perfect, he wouldn't hurt her. Silence fell heavy. Morales let it sit, then asked, Did you ever call 911? Nora's eyes brimmed. I tried. He always caught me. And when he didn't, no one came. Officers knocked. He kept them out. They left. Every time. Morales slid a folder open. Call logs. She tapped entries. May 4th. Hang up. Welfare check. Negative. June 19th. Same. July 3rd. Again. 6 times in 3 months. Someone dialed from that apartment. 6 times. The system walked away. Nora's sob broke free. We were right there. We were right there. Lila stirred, pressing her face deeper into Rook's fur. The shepherd curled tighter around her. Morales shut the folder. There's more. Your mother, Mabel Whitaker, called my desk. Repeatedly. We dismissed her. I thought she was exaggerating. Tears streamed down Nora's face. She knew. She always knew. Morales nodded. She did. And we didn't listen. That's on us. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Morales said softly, This ends now. Owen Pike will not walk free, and your daughter's voice will be heard. Rook's gaze lingered on her, as if weighing her words. After a pause, he lowered his head back onto Lila's lap. Later, Evan stood in the corridor, staring through the observation glass. Nora slumped against pillows, her hand trembling through her daughter's hair. Lila slept against Rook's thick fur. The shepherd sprawled across the bed like an 85-pound guardian who had ignored every rule but saved a life. Evan leaned against the wall, catching his reflection in the opposite glass. Dark circles under his eyes, the weariness of a widowed father, older than his 38 years, and heavy with guilt. He knew the truth. Riverside Terrace wasn't new. He had been there half a dozen times in 3 months. Welfare checks, hang-up calls. Each time he followed procedure, knocked, waited, silence. Each time he left. 6 times he walked away. He rubbed his face, thinking of Caleb, 12 years old, safe at his sister's house. What if it had been him? A boy dialing 911 in the dark while no one came. The thought made Evan's chest seize. He sank onto a chair, elbows on knees, his badge pressed heavy against his chest. It hadn't been training that saved Lila, not his calm voice, not his Glock, not his years on the force. It had been Rook, scarred, broken Rook, rescued from a dogfighting ring 2 years ago. A dog who carried cages and fists etched into his body. He had survived fear. He knew it. And when they drove past Riverside Terrace, it wasn't Evan who sensed the storm. It was Rook. "You broke every rule, partner," Evan murmured. "And thank God you did." Detective Morales approached quietly. "You're blaming yourself," she said, more a statement than a question. He didn't answer. She lowered into the chair beside him. "The system fails more often than it should. We log the calls, follow the rules, and kids slip through. Sometimes it's not about who was there. It's about what we're allowed to see." "Protocol almost got her killed," Evan muttered. "What does that say about us?" Morales glanced through the glass at Rook curled around Lila. "It says sometimes the only ones who see the truth are the ones who've lived it. That dog knew because he survived fear, just like she has." Evan swallowed hard, following her gaze. Through the window, he saw Lila stir, her small fingers tightening on Rook's fur. The shepherd's eyes, half open, watched even in rest. He wouldn't sleep until she was safe. For the first time that night, Evan felt something other than guilt. Gratitude. Gratitude for a partner who had risen from ashes, who carried scars not as weakness, but as weapons, who drew the line when Evan hesitated. He leaned back, the badge heavy on his chest. "You saved her," he whispered to the glass. "Not me. You." And maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes the heroes weren't the ones with guns or badges, but the ones with fur and scars, who refused to let another soul endure what they had. The interrogation room reeked of bleach and stale coffee. Fluorescent light flickered above, throwing Owen Pike's warped shadow across the cinder-block wall. He slumped at the metal table, wrists cuffed, shoulders sagging. Angry bite marks reddened his arms, Rook's precise handiwork. The firefighter tattoo on his bicep, once a badge of honor, now looked pitiful on a man who reeked of whiskey, smoke, and failure. Across from him sat Detective Elena Morales, notebook open, recorder blinking red. She leaned back, calm but unyielding, eyes fixed on him with the patience of someone who had outlasted countless liars. Minutes passed in silence. Owen's fingers twitched against the cuffs, gaze fixed on the tabletop. Finally, Morales spoke. "Owen Pike, you're charged with attempted homicide, domestic violence, and child endangerment. Why did you try to hurt your stepdaughter?" A bitter laugh rasped from his throat. "Hurt her? No. I wanted to save her." "Save," Morales repeated, pen poised. Owen's eyes snapped up, glassy with conviction. "The world eats you alive, piece by piece. Fire doesn't. Fire burns clean. It leaves ash. Ash is pure. That girl, Lila, she'd have learned pain the slow way, just like Marcus." Morales's pen stilled. Marcus Pike, the younger brother,
whose death Owen had woven into myth. "Tell me about Marcus." Owen leaned back, eyes unfocused. "He followed me everywhere. I promised to keep him safe. War doesn't let you keep promises. When he died, I swore I wouldn't let another child walk into the same flames. I wasn't killing Lila. I was rescuing her, giving her mercy." "Mercy," Morales echoed. His voice rose, raw. "You don't know what it's like to hear screams in your head, to smell smoke every time you close your eyes. That girl was already drowning in fear. I was the only one brave enough to end it before the fire consumed her." He slammed his fists against the table, cuffs rattling. Morales didn't flinch. "For the record," she said, voice crisp, "Owen Pike has stated that attempting to end his stepdaughter's life was an act of rescue and mercy." Owen sagged back, whispering, "Fire doesn't lie. People do." Morales shut her notebook with a snap. The interview concluded at 2:47 a.m. By dawn, the precinct conference room hummed with a projector. A corkboard bristled with photos, reports, and red string. Detectives filled the seats. At the back, Evan Blake sat with Rook stretched at his feet, the shepherd's amber eyes tracking every word. Morales began. Owen Pike wasn't just a disgraced firefighter. He was a man in freefall, long before Nora Hart met him. The screen lit up with an old headline. "Local firefighter rescues family from blaze." A younger Owen smiled faintly, soot on his face, a child in his arms. "Back then he was a hero," Morales said. "Commendations, medals. He knew what it meant to run into burning buildings. Communities loved him." Click. Another headline. "Firefighter suspended amid bribery allegations." 3 years later, accusations of payoffs for overlooking faulty inspections. Not proven, but the stain stuck. He was dismissed, quietly, too quietly, and the spiral began. Click. Insurance records, payouts bold on the screen. Over 8 years, 3 towns, each time. A fire tied to his residence, a garage blaze, an apartment kitchen fire, both ruled accidental, both followed by insurance claims. Each fire bought him time from mounting debts, gambling, payday loans, collection agencies, but it was never enough. The next slide, police reports, photos of bruises. Alongside the fires came violence. A girlfriend in Waco with wrist bruises, a landlord in Temple filing noise complaints, suspecting abuse. Nothing stuck. He slipped through, again and again. Finally, Nora's hospital intake photo filled the screen, bruises stark against pale skin. "Until Nora Hart," Morales said quietly. "A widow. Vulnerable." He presented himself as protective, the firefighter who once saved lives, and she believed him, because we all want to believe in saviors. Her voice hardened. But he wasn't saving anyone anymore. He was consuming them. And this time, the target wasn't just her. It was Lila. The projector clicked off. The room dimmed. Morales closed her folder. This is who Owen Pike became. A man who wore the mask of hero until it cracked. If Rook hadn't intervened. She let the silence finish the thought. Evan's hand brushed Rook's scarred fur. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes steady, as if reminding them all of the truth. Sometimes the only shield against a predator is instinct. By sunrise, the story had already spread beyond Austin. Headlines scrolled across televisions. Hero dog saves girl from stepfather's attack. Grainy photos followed Riverside Terrace under flashing lights. a shepherd pressed against a stretcher, a child clutching a stuffed rabbit. By noon, St. David's Hospital was besieged. Reporters clustered on the sidewalk, cameras and microphones jostling. "Tell us about the dog. Can we see the girl?" Officer Blake, "How does it feel to work with a canine hero?" Evan brushed past every time, refusing sound bites. He knew what lay behind the headline. Bruises on Nora's throat, a child who flinched at footsteps, a dog who refused to eat until she touched the food first. The world wanted a miracle story. The truth was jagged, messy, raw. Inside, Rook never left Lila's side. He paced at night, eyes half open even in rest, body coiled with the vow that nothing, not even adoring strangers, would come between him and the child. Then the hospital doors opened for Mabel Whitaker. Silver hair in a bun, cane tapping with each step, her presence filled the sterile hall with the force of home. She pushed past nurses without hesitation. "Enough," she declared. "This child is not a headline." "She's my granddaughter." She lowered herself beside Lila's bed. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing back hair. "You don't have to be brave anymore. Grandma's here." Lila stirred, fragile smile blooming. For the first time since the night before, her shoulders eased. She pressed her face into Rook's neck, whispering words only he and Mabel heard. Reporters clamored down the hall, but Mabel ignored them. "If they think they're shoving cameras in her face, they're out of their minds," she muttered, smoothing her granddaughter's hair. From the doorway, Evan watched quietly. He had faced guns and flames, but felt small before Mabel's fierce love. "Detective Morales says the press won't let up," he said softly. "They'll want interviews, photos. They'll call it a miracle." Mabel snorted. "Miracle? Don't insult me. This wasn't a miracle. It was a nightmare barely stopped in time." "A child doesn't need cameras when she still wakes up shaking at the sound of boots in the hallway. You do what you must with the department. Leave Lila to me." Relief washed over Evan. In Mabel, Lila had found the shield no badge could match. The next morning, the frenzy grew. Talk shows debated police dogs in domestic violence cases. Editorials praised the courage of a canine partner, while condemning systemic failures. On social media, Rook went viral. Guardian angel, Austin's finest. Evan scrolled headlines in the cafeteria, coffee untouched. The praise left a bitter taste. None of those commentators saw the bruises, or the way Lila clutched Rook's fur even in sleep. When a reporter cornered him outside, he gave the same answer. "Talk to the department. I've got work to do." Then he walked past, resting a hand briefly on Rook's head. Because the only story that mattered wasn't the one broadcast to millions. It was unfolding in a quiet hospital room, a grandmother's hand, a child's healing breath, a mother's slow reckoning, and a dog who would not sleep until the girl was safe. And in that silence, stronger than fire, stronger than fear, something was taking root. Not fame, not a spectacle. Healing. Mabel Whitaker's bungalow sat at the end of Elm Street, its chipped paint and sagging porch softened by flower pots that bloomed defiantly each spring. To 7-year-old Lila Hart, stepping inside felt like crossing into another world, a world untouched by Owen Pike's rage. The air smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish, familiar from holidays before Owen had cut her off. Wallpaper, faded with age, felt like a hug, not decay. The steady tick of a hallway clock was nothing like the pounding boots she once counted at Riverside Terrace. Mabel had prepared a bedroom herself. She painted the walls butter yellow, the shade of early sunlight, and left a box of crayons by the dresser. Over weeks, Lila filled the room with drawings, sunflowers, dogs with bright eyes, skies without shadows. Her pictures no longer bled in black and red. They carried cautious hope, like a child testing if it was safe to dream again. Rook became part of this new rhythm. Evan couldn't bring him daily. He was still a police dog. But whenever the patrol car turned onto Elm Street, Rook's ears shot up and his tail thumped the seat like a drum. He bounded up the walkway, pressing his nose to the window until Mabel let him inside. Lila would drop crayons or homework and sprint barefoot to meet him, Pepper the stuffed rabbit bouncing against her chest. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck with relief so fierce it seemed she feared he might vanish. Mabel often watched quietly from the kitchen doorway. She saw the way Rook's presence softened the girl's shoulders, how Lila whispered secrets into his fur too fragile for adult ears. And she saw how the dog answered with silence, his steady body pressed close, amber eyes unblinking. One evening after supper with Evan and his son Caleb, Lila pressed her forehead to the window, watching their taillights fade. "He'll come back, won't he, Grandma?" Mabel didn't hesitate. "Yes, sweetheart. Good dogs always come back, especially the ones who've chosen you." And Lila believed her. Life wasn't perfect. Nightmares still clawed at Lila's sleep, dragging her back to Owen's boots, splintering her door. On those nights, Mabel sat on the bed's edge, quilt around her shoulders, humming lullabies her daughter once knew. And if Rook was visiting, he simply rose and planted his body at the foot of the bed, his breathing steady until the girl's trembling eased. Slowly, the neighborhood noticed changes. Whispers of pity gave way to smiles. Lila was no longer that poor girl, but the one who laughed when Rook chased butterflies, who chalked rainbows across sidewalks, who played hopscotch in bare feet. Mabel's living room mantel filled with drawings. One showed Rook as a knight in shining armor, sword replaced by bared teeth. Another showed the yellow house glowing like a lantern, the word home scrawled across the roof. Evan often lingered during visits, quiet in the doorway, watching this small miracle. A child rediscovering safety, a dog who guarded joy as fiercely as he had guarded life. Meanwhile, Nora Hart began her own slow climb from shame. Dr. Evelyn Harper's office smelled faintly of lavender. Nora sat on the couch, blouse pressed stiff like a costume, fingers twisted in her lap. "I stayed too long," she admitted. "I thought if I was perfect enough, he wouldn't hurt her. I told myself I could protect her, but she learned to hide in closets while I froze." Dr. Harper's voice was gentle. "That wasn't a failure. That was survival. Abusers trap with fear, finances, threats. You loved your daughter the best you could. Now you're learning new ways." The words cracked something open. Tears spilled despite tissues clutched in trembling hands. Nora had stitched strangers back to life in the ER, but hadn't shielded her own child. That guilt gnawed at her ribs. Still, she came back week after week, forcing herself to speak, believing that maybe one day she could earn Lila's trust again. The first supervised visit came on a rainy Saturday at a child advocacy center painted in bright colors, stocked with board games and stuffed animals to soften the edges of pain. Lila arrived with Mabel, clutching Pepper. She stayed silent when Nora rose to greet her. "I brought something," Nora said, kneeling carefully. She slid a blue-wrapped box across the table. Inside, watercolor paints, the kind David, Lila's father, had once bought her. "I remembered you liked to draw." For the first time, Lila glanced at her. Hesitation lingered, but so did recognition. She took the box and retreated to a small table, unwrapping it with cautious fingers. The silence held until the door creaked open. Claws clicked against the tile. Rook trotted in, Evan behind him. Lila's face lit up, her first genuine smile of the day. She dropped Pepper, running to hug the shepherd's neck. She whispered into his fur, his tail sweeping the floor. Then she looked at her mother, eyes softer. "Do you think I could paint him?" she asked. Nora swallowed a sob and nodded. "I'd love that." Rook sat patiently while Lila dipped her brush, tongue poking out with concentration. Black for his back, tan for his chest, amber for his eyes. Stroke by stroke, something invisible bridged the distance. When the session ended, Lila didn't hug her mother. Not yet. But as she gathered her things, she whispered, "Thank you for the paints." Fragile words, but to Nora, they were a beginning. Weeks passed. Healing was slow, stitched drop by drop. But in Mabel's backyard one golden afternoon, laughter rose like bells. Evan leaned on the porch rail, coffee cooling in his hand, watching his son Caleb chase Lila across the grass. Their giggles rang unburdened, the sound of children forgetting heaviness for a while. Rook bounded between them, a referee in fur, weaving gracefully despite his size. Caleb tossed a tennis ball high. Rook leapt, jaws snapping shut mid-air, landing sure-footed, as if joy were his only battle now. "You're too slow, Caleb," Lila laughed. Pepper safe on the porch swing. Caleb grinned. "Too slow. Watch this." He lunged, sneakers pounding the grass, while Rook darted between them, tail wagging like a banner. Mabel stepped onto the porch, wiping her apron. "They fit together, don't they?" Evan nodded. "Like they've known each other forever." "Pain makes children recognize each other," Mabel said softly. "She knows loss, so does your boy, and the dog." Her voice caught. "That dog knows survival better than most people." Evan glanced at her, struck by her quiet strength. She had weathered her own storms, yet here she was, tending to a child's healing with fierce tenderness. In the yard, Caleb collapsed dramatically. "I surrender." Lila laughed until her stomach hurt. Rook plopped down beside him, tennis ball still clamped proudly in his jaws. Evan chuckled. For a moment, everything felt beautifully ordinary. Maria would have loved this, he thought. Caleb laughing, Lila glowing, Rook standing guard, even in play. He felt her absence as a steady ache, but for the first time, it carried gratitude instead of only grief. "Families don't always look like we expect," Mabel murmured. "But love makes its own shape." Evan let the words sink in. His own cracks, widower, single father, weary cop, seemed to fill with something gentler. Resilience, community, unexpected family. Caleb leapt up suddenly. "One more round," Lila squealed, braids flying as she ran. Rook barked once, bounding to Evan's side, ready to play again. Evan set his coffee aside, stepping off the porch. "All right," he grinned. "You two against me and Rook. Let's see what you've got." The yard erupted in laughter, the scars of the past fading for a while beneath sunlight and joy. And a man who thought he'd lost too much learned that love, steady as a dog's breath, had found him again. The small yellow bungalow on Elm Street smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken. Mabel Whittaker moved calmly in the kitchen, though her hands betrayed the nerves of a woman who knew tonight was more than dinner. Tonight was about trust, fragile, uncertain, but worth fighting for. The table was set with her best china, faded floral plates usually saved for Easter. Lila arranged napkins with solemn precision. Pepper the stuffed rabbit perched on a chair with a fresh ribbon tied around its neck. "Grandma," she whispered, "do you think she'll come?" "She'll come, sweetheart," Mabel promised. The doorbell rang. Rook's ears twitched. His tail thumped once before he padded forward. Nora Hart stood on the porch, her dress plain, her smile trembling. In her hands, a small wrapped package. "Hi, baby," she whispered. Lila clutched Pepper tighter, then nodded. "Hi, Mom." Not rejection, not embrace, something in between. Hope cracked open. Inside, headlights swept the window. Caleb's laughter echoed, followed by Evan's voice. They entered with the ease of family, carrying pie and warmth. Rook stationed himself between the children, his amber eyes cataloguing every mood. Even when Nora stroked his fur, he allowed it. Patience, not full forgiveness, but a start. Dinner began in silence, the clink of silverware louder than words. Then Caleb, mouth full, declared, "This is way better than Dad's cooking." Evan rolled his eyes. Laughter rippled. Even Lila smiled. Something shifted. When plates were cleared, Lila hesitated, then carried a painting to the table. Rook, painted in two halves, one side armored like a knight, the other softened by a child's hand. At the bottom, protector, friend. The room stilled. Nora's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered, brushing the paper's edge. "He saved me," Lila said simply. "But he helps me feel safe. With you too." Nora blinked hard, her voice trembling. "I want to be that for you. One day at a time." Rook lowered his head onto Lila's knee, anchoring the moment. For the first time in years, Mabel felt her family knit together, fragile, imperfect, but whole. The next week, the Austin Police Department gathered in its briefing hall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but the air carried reverence. At the front stood Officer Evan Blake in crisp uniform. Beside him, Rook sat proud, the gold of his badge-shaped tag glinting. "Today," the captain announced, "we honor a partner who went beyond protocols. Rook, rescued from cruelty, saved a child's life when our systems faltered." Applause swelled. Hardened officers wiped their eyes. Rook's tail swept once against the floor. Evan bent low, whispering, "Good boy." The commendation, a framed certificate and a brass medallion, was presented. Evan accepted on his partner's behalf, though the words felt too small. Men who had faced armed suspects now knelt to scratch behind the shepherd's ears, slipping contraband treats from their pockets. When the line thinned, Evan knelt last. His hand pressed against Rook's chest, steady heartbeat beneath his palm. "We made it, partner. From the cages to this, you're free now." That evening, the commendation hung above Mabel's fireplace. The floral wallpaper framed it imperfectly, but that was right. This wasn't a trophy room. It was a home. Lila stood on tiptoe to straighten the frame. "It looks right there," she said with certainty. Rook sprawled on the rug, tail sweeping across the floor. His days of sirens and midnight patrols were over. Now he patrolled Mabel's backyard, walked Lila to school, and stood guard outside her bedroom door. Retirement wasn't an ending, but a new definition. Not Officer Rook, but Lila Hart's guardian. One evening, Evan and Caleb arrived for dinner. They found Lila sketching against Rook's back, Pepper propped beside her. She held up the page. "I'm drawing his new badge. Not for the police. Just for me." On paper, Rook wasn't armored. He was gentle, a giant with a child's hand resting on his paw. Above him,
in uneven letters, Guardian. Evan's throat tightened. Mabel's eyes shimmered, and Rook sighed deeply, his muzzle graying, but his purpose clearer than ever. His most important assignment had only just begun. Night settled gently over the small house. Dishes were washed, lamps dimmed, cicadas droned outside. Lila padded down the hall in pajamas, Pepper under her arm. Rook followed, claws clicking softly against wood, body relaxed but alert. Mabel carried a glass of water, humming. The bedroom glowed warm yellow, its walls filled with rainbows, flowers, and sketches of Rook. Shadows no longer menaced. They rested like folded blankets. Lila climbed into bed, quilt pulled to her chin. Rook curled at her side, his body an arc of protection. His sigh was deep, content. "Good night, sweetheart," Mabel whispered, brushing a stray hair from her forehead, but Lila's grey eyes stayed open. "Grandma, do you think Rook dreams?" Rook lifted his head at his name, amber eyes catching lamplight. Mabel smiled. "Oh yes, darling, he dreams." "What does he dream about?" Mabel stroked her hair, glancing at the shepherd stretched long beside her. She thought of cages, chains, violence, and of the night he shattered a door to stand between a child and death. "He dreams of keeping you safe," she said softly, "of chasing away shadows, of making sure you wake to mornings filled with light." Lila pressed her cheek to Pepper, but kept her hand on Rook's side, feeling his steady breath. "Then I hope he dreams forever," she whispered. Rook shifted closer, eyes closing, but ears twitching. Protector, even in rest. Mabel lingered, heart swelling with ache and gratitude. She thought of Nora, slowly mending, of Evan and Caleb. Laughter returned. Of her own husband's words, that ordinary miracles hold life together. This was one of them, a child falling asleep with her hand on the fur of a dog who had refused to let the world break him, and in doing so, saved her too. Lila's breathing slowed, hand still resting on Rook. Pepper sat, watchful on the pillow, stitched eyes like silent witness. "You're safe now, my darling," Mabel whispered, turning off the lamp. Moonlight caught the commendation above the fireplace, its golden seal glowing faintly. She paused in the doorway, listening to the layered breathing of child and dog, like verses of the same hymn. And she understood. A story that began in violence had ended here, in the quiet triumph of loyalty, love, and second chances. Sometimes the stories we share about dogs aren't really about dogs at all. They're about us. They remind us of the power of loyalty, the comfort of a steady presence, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. German shepherds, with their courage and devotion, seem to embody those qualities in a way that touches something deep inside the human heart. If you've ever looked into the eyes of your own dog and felt that unspoken bond, you know exactly what I mean. They aren't just pets. They're family, guardians of our quiet moments, and companions through the hardest nights. If you'd like to explore ways to connect more deeply with your own four-legged friend, there are some wonderful resources out there that offer gentle guidance. One I've found meaningful is here. Link. You don't have to click. It's just something I thought might be worth sharing. Take it as a reminder that the love between humans and animals is one of life's greatest blessings. And if you have a dog by your side tonight, give them a little scratch behind the ears. That small gesture says more than words ever could.